Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take your complicated stack of research notes, articles, and scribbled thoughts and try to turn them into something clear and actionable.
Yeah,
Our listener, who we call the learner, has run into a problem that honestly hits pretty much everyone.
I know this one well.
You have the sources, you have a great insight, you might even have a perfect thesis statement, but then you open that blank document and it's just alphabet soup.
It is. It's that moment where all the information you've gathered just crashes into this organizational anxiety.
Right.
You've done the hard part, the intellectual work, but now you face this totally different and, equally difficult structural work of arranging it all.
And if you skip that step,
The result is always the same. It's a scattered, unfocused draft that just buries your brilliant research under this mountain of chaotic presentation.
that moment, that paralysis of staring at the blank page, that's exactly what we want to get ahead of today.
Right.
So many writers, I think, make the mistake of believing they can just jump straight from research to the final draft.
They do. They try to write and structure the argument at the same time.
And that's not really writing, is it? It
So-
feels more like excavating. You're trying to build this complex thing, a research paper, without any foundation or framework.
It's the perfect analogy. Think of it this way. Your research notes are like the best lumber, the best steel, the best glass you can find. But a stack of materials isn't a skyscraper.
You need the blueprint.
You need the blueprint, and that's our mission today. We want to provide that essential framework, the non-negotiable blueprint for a compelling research paper. This deep dive is going to map out a really detailed, section-by-section outline.
An outline that guarantees clarity.
Clarity, logic, and persuasion. If you follow this blueprint, you're not writing from scratch anymore. You're not facing that scary, daunting task. You're just expanding. You're filling in a strong, logical foundation that's already there.
I really like that distinction, moving from writing to expanding. It just immediately lowers the stakes, you know?
It does.
So let's start with that highest level of order before we zoom in on the specific pieces.
Okay, so we need to define the 5 acts of your persuasive drama, so to speak. This structure is pretty much universal. It's designed to walk any reader through your argument logically.
Taking them from the problem to the solutions to your solution.
Exactly. From identifying the problem to surveying what's already out there to presenting your new analysis and then finally reflecting on what it all means.
So what is that generalized, non-negotiable order that every solid academic paper, from a term paper to a dissertation, has to follow?
Okay, so it always begins with the introduction. That's your promise to the reader. It says, here's what I'm going to argue and why you should care.
Okay, step 1.
Following that, you have the background or literature review. This is where you set up the existing academic conversation.
So what other people have already said about it.
Precisely. Then third, you have the heart of the paper,
Mm,
the body paragraphs or analysis. This is where your core evidence and your interpretation live.
right.
Fourth, and this is a crucial bridge, is the discussion or interpretation. This is where you reflect on the significance of what you found, the limitations, all of that.
And then to finish.
And finally, the conclusion. You wrap it all up and you project forward.
That flow seems so intuitive on the surface, but I know it's the sheer pressure of all that information that just makes the whole structure crumble for people.
It does, and our sources give us a perfect case study for this with a student named Hassan. He had all the knowledge, but he just didn't have the roadmap.
And his dilemma really illustrates why this structure is so essential.
Perfectly. I mean, Hassan wasn't lazy. He was just completely overwhelmed. He actually done the hardest part of the job, which was crafting a really clear, specific, and strong thesis statement.
And what was his thesis?
His thesis was, regular exercise reduces stress in university students by improving mood, decreasing anxiety, and increasing energy levels.
Okay, what I love about that is that it's so specific. It doesn't just say exercise reduces stress. It gives you the 3 mechanisms: mood, anxiety, and energy.
Exactly. That kind of specificity is a gift to a writer. It basically pre-structures the entire paper form.
But he still hit a wall.
He hit a wall, he sat down to write, and he had a source about the physiological role of endorphins. That's mood. He had a statistical study about anxiety scores. He had testimonials about better sleep. That's energy. He looked at this pile of gold standard research, and he just panicked.
Because he had no designated spot for any of it. He didn't know where to start. Should it be the physiology, the psychology, the background?
Everything felt equally important, equally urgent. And that is the danger zone. When a writer's organization collapses, they tend to fall back on one of two really ineffective strategies.
Which are?
Either they write this stream of consciousness thing where they jump from one idea to the next with no connection, or, and this is more common, they rush the foundational sections.
Like the literature review.
Exactly. They'll just summarize 20 articles in a row because they feel this pressure to get to the good stuff.
Yeah. And if you rush the lit review, then the analysis that follows has no context. The reader hasn't been brought into the conversation. It's like a domino effect of failure.
A cascading failure, precisely. The outline is the ultimate defense against this chaos. By forcing Hassan to arrange his main arguments and his evidence before he writes a single paragraph, the outline gives him clarity.
He stops trying to think and write at the same time.
He's just organizing. The burden shifts. You're no longer trying to build an argument while you're drowning in information.
Yeah.
You're just filling in boxes that you've already strategically designed.
It turns a really stressful, subjective process into something objective and manageable.
And that's the secret. You minimize the number of decisions you have to make during the actual drafting stage. So we've got the 5-part foundation. Now let's zoom in and define the rigorous requirements for each of those 5 parts.
Okay, let's start with the introduction. This feels like the single most important contract you make with your reader. It's not just a hello.
No, it's a strategic document. Its core function is really threefold. Tell the reader the topic, make them care about it, the significance, and then tell them what the paper is going to prove. That's the thesis.
And to do that, our sources say the introduction isn't just one free-flowing paragraph. It's a sequence of 4 very specific required elements, and they have to be in order.
Yes, you have to guide the reader from the big, broad concern down to your specific investigation.
So element 1 is the hook. And I have seen so many papers start with something vague like, since the dawn of time, humans have wondered about stress.
Right. That's not a hook. A hook has to be specific and surprising, maybe even a little provocative. It has to grab the reader.
So what's a good example? The sources talk about a paper on screen time and sleep quality.
Yeah, that's a great one. A weak hook would be, sleep is important for children.
Okay, pretty boring.
Right. A strong hook is a concrete data point. Children aged 8 to 12 are currently sleeping, on average, 45 minutes less per night than children in that same group a decade ago, which correlates with a measurable 8% decline in standardized testing scores.
Wow. Okay, that's specific, it's alarming, and it immediately makes me ask why? Why is this happening?
Which is the perfect transition into element 2, background information. You've dropped this surprising fact, now you need to give the broader context.
Explain the knowns.
Exactly. So in the screen time example, you'd go from that shocking statistic to explaining why sleep is so critical for kids, its role in memory, emotional regulation, growth. You're building the necessary bridge from that sensational fact to your serious academic question.
This part shows the reader that you actually understand the scope of the problem. You're not just, throwing out stats.
Absolutely. And once that groundwork is there, you narrow the focus way down for element 3, your research question.
And this needs to be super clear.
It has to be the precise question your paper is going to answer. So for the screen time paper, a strong research question would be something like, to what extent does nightly exposure to mobile blue light impact the duration and physiological quality of sleep, specifically REM and deep sleep cycles, in high school adolescents aged 14 to 17?
That level of detail is so important. It tells the reader what the paper is not about. It's not about toddlers, not about general light. It's about blue light and specific sleep cycles in a specific group.
And that precision leads you right into element 4, the most critical sentence in the entire paper, your thesis statement.
The authoritative answer to the question you just asked.
Yes. It's the single controlling idea that everything else in the paper will support. So for that screen time paper, the thesis might be, increased nightly exposure to blue light from mobile devices significantly reduces deep sleep duration in adolescents, resulting in demonstrably lower executive function scores and heightened mood instability, all due to blue light's direct suppression of melatonin production.
So you start broad with the hook, you establish context with the background, you define the parameters with the research question, and you land on your complex, arguable answer, the thesis.
And that structure ensures every single reader is on the same page as you before they even get to the body of your paper.
Which brings us to the section that I think really separates the novice writer from a true researcher. The literature review.
Ah, yes.
It's not enough to just list what you read. Our sources are so insistent on this critical distinction. It has to be a synthesis, not a summary.
This is where we need to slow down, because the failure to synthesize is probably the #1 reason academic papers just fall flat. A summary is just a list. It's passive. Source A said this, source B said that, source C said something else.
It forces the reader to do all the work of connecting the dots.
It does. It shows you can read, but it doesn't show that you can think critically.
So synthesis, in contrast, is active. It's dynamic.
Synthesis is the process of grouping those ideas, finding the common threads, spotting the contradictions, and basically showing the reader the landscape of the current academic conversation. Your job is to show you're an informed participant in that dialogue.
You're mapping the territory.
You're mapping the territory to show where the existing research ends and where your specific new contribution is about to begin.
Okay, that's the what. But how does someone actually do it? What's the step-by-step approach to synthesis?
Our sources lay out 3 necessary steps. The first one is structural. Group your sources by themes. You have to avoid organizing by author or by date. You group them by the concepts they address.
Let's use the remote work example from the sources. Say you've got 40 sources on remote work and its effect on families. You don't start with Article 1.
No. You identify the recurring themes. If your research question is about working mothers, for example, your themes have to reflect that. You create these thematic buckets.
Okay, like what?
Like Theme 1, benefits of remote work flexibility, time saved, things like that. Then Theme 2, challenges of remote work isolation, blurred work-life boundaries.
Yeah.
Then maybe Theme 3, psychological and social effects, job satisfaction, team dynamics. And critically, Theme 4, gender-specific considerations, which would address, the disproportionate burden of childcare that often falls on working mothers.
And by using those themes as your subheadings, you're automatically setting yourself up for step 2.
Which is to compare findings from different studies. This is where the critical thinking really kicks in.
You're moving beyond just reporting.
This is the intellectual heart of the lit review.
Yeah.
You don't just say Smith found X, Jones found Y. You group them. You might say something like, research across themes 1 and 2 largely agrees that remote work increases flexibility, yet this benefit is often complicated by what one researcher calls boundary collapse, where 65% of professionals report working longer hours.
So you're showing consensus and contradiction at the same time.
Exactly.
What happens if you find a really strong contradiction? Say one group of sources shows massive productivity gains from remote work, but another shows a huge rise in employee burnout.
That tension is gold. You have to present that contradiction directly. You synthesize it. You'd say something like, while financial metrics from one study demonstrate a 12% rise in output, this must be contextualized by psychological data from another source, which noted a 25% increase in reported anxiety. This suggests that the gains in efficiency may be coming at a substantial human cost.
So you're interpreting the conflict. You're not trying to solve it for the reader. You're just defining the debate.
Precisely. And that leads to the third and final step. Show how the existing research directly connects to your research question. The lit review can't just end. You have to hand off the baton to your own analysis.
So after discussing those 4 themes in remote work, you would end the section by saying something like, while the literature covers productivity and psychology, there's a real gap in the research on, say, mandated mental health breaks for working mothers. Therefore, this paper investigates.
Yes. You use the literature review to justify your own existence. It proves you're not working in a vacuum, and that your thesis is actually necessary to fill a clear, documented gap in the conversation. It makes your work feel essential.
Okay, so we've set the stage, we've mapped the conversation, now we're in the engine room, the analysis section. This is where you directly answer your research question.
This is the delivery. If the introduction was the promise, the analysis is the delivery, and it relies completely on the structural integrity of your individual body paragraphs.
This is where the argument is won or lost.
Absolutely. Every single paragraph has to be a highly focused, self-contained unit that drives home one single supporting point for your main thesis.
And to make sure that happens, our sources lay out what they call the 4 pillars for every effective body paragraph. What's the first pillar, the foundation?
Pillar 1 is the topic sentence. This is basically the thesis statement for the paragraph itself. This is a focus on one key point, and that point must directly support your main thesis.
Let's go back to Hassan's thesis. Regular exercise reduces stress in university students by improving mood, decreasing anxiety, and increasing energy levels.
That thesis basically hands him his 3 topic sentences on a silver platter.
The structural clarity is just immediate.
It is. His analysis section will have 3 major parts. Topic sentence 1 will be about mood. One primary way exercise mitigates stress is by demonstrably improving mood through neurochemical processes.
Okay.
Topic sentence 2 will be about anxiety. Beyond just mood elevation, structured physical activity specifically targets and reduces symptoms of generalized anxiety. And topic sentence 3 will be about energy.
And that structure prevents him from mixing his arguments. He knows exactly what goes where. So after the topic sentence, we have pillar 2.
Evidence from your sources. This is the data, the quote, the statistic. So for Hassan's first point on mood, this is where he puts the finding that exercise increases endorphin levels. The evidence has to be super relevant and cited correctly.
Okay, and this brings us to pillar 3, which is where I think most papers fall apart. The explanation or analysis of the evidence. So many people think the evidence just speaks for itself.
It never does.
Yeah.
This is your voice. This is your critical thinking. If you skip this, you're just a transcriber. The analysis is where you interpret, decode, and justify that evidence.
So let's use a specific example. Hassan puts in a quote from a study that says, participants showed a 20% increase in plasma endorphin concentration. What's the weak way to analyze that versus the strong way?
The weak way is to just say, as the study shows, endorphins went up by 20%.
Right, that just repeats the quote.
It leaves all the heavy lifting to the reader. The strong approach takes 3 or 4 sentences to explicitly connect that evidence to the topic sentence. You have to interpret the implication.
So walk me through that stronger interpretation.
You'd write something like, this 20% increase is a crucial physiological indicator. It shows that the mood improvement isn't just subjective, it's rooted in verifiable neurochemistry. The release of these natural opioids directly counters the high cortisol state caused by academic stress.
So you're explaining the mechanism.
Therefore, the physical intervention, the exercise, directly addresses the chemical imbalance. It validates the claim that exercise is a mood regulator.
That's so robust. You've gone from what the quote says to what it means for the argument.
And that leads right into the final piece. Pillar 4, connection back to your main thesis. Why did we just spend all this time on endorphins? This last sentence reminds the reader of the bigger picture.
It links this one specific finding back to Hassan's overall claim about reducing stress. It makes sure the paragraph doesn't feel like it's just floating in space.
Exactly. If you enforce that 4-part structure for every paragraph, topic, sentence, evidence, analysis, connection, you achieve this incredible coherence. The reader always knows where they are and why the information matters.
So the analysis proves the point, but then the discussion section interprets that proof. This is where we step back from the data and do some real critical reflection. It's the so what section.
And it is absolutely mandatory for showing high-level critical thought.
Yeah.
You're tying the whole argument together here. You're stepping back from the granular details and looking at the whole forest, not just the individual trees.
And our sources give us 4 critical questions this section has to answer. What's question 1?
Question 1 is, what do the findings mean? This is the high-level interpretation of your analysis.
So for Hassan, he proved that exercise improves mood, reduces anxiety, and increases energy. What does that mean?
It means his hypothesis was validated, sure, but the discussion has to go further. It means that a university that only relies on, say, cognitive behavioral therapy for student stress might be missing a vital, cost-effective, non-drug-based defense. The meaning is the theoretical consequence of your proof.
Okay, and question 2 gets at the real-world use. Why are they important? This is about the implications. How should this new knowledge change things?
This is all about application. If Hassan's findings are solid, they should influence university policy. The importance might be that mandatory movement breaks should be built into long classes, or that the health center budget should help subsidize gym memberships, not just crisis counseling.
You're showing how the knowledge moves off the page and into real life.
Exactly.
Okay, question 3 is so important for intellectual honesty. Are there limitations to the research or data used? I think a lot of writers are afraid to point out flaws in their own work.
And that is a huge mistake. Acknowledging limitations doesn't weaken your argument at all. It actually reinforces your credibility. It shows your rigor. No study is perfect.
So for Hassan's paper, what's a specific limitation he would have to address?
Well, as a student, he probably relied on self-reported stress surveys, right, where students just rate how stressed they feel. He has to acknowledge that. He has to say, the reliance on self-reported data introduces the potential for desirability bias.
Meaning what?
Where participants might over-report positive outcomes because they know the study is about exercise and mood.
That's a great technical point. You're not just saying the sample was small. You're identifying a specific methodological flawed desirability bias and explaining its impact.
Yes. And to really elevate it, he should contrast what he did with what he didn't do. He could say his study didn't use physiological biomarkers.
Yeah.
He could explain that while perceived stress is important, future research should use objective metrics, like measuring cortisol levels in saliva.
Cortisol, the stress hormone.
Exactly. Showing that, that scientific contrast perceived stress versus a verifiable physiological marker, that shows real intellectual maturity.
It does, and that sets up the conclusion nicely. Okay, what's the last question for the discussion section?
Are there alternative explanations that should be considered? You have to anticipate the counterarguments. For Hassan, the big alternative explanation is usually social.
Meaning, did the exercise itself reduce the stress, or was it just the fact that he was in a group getting a scheduled social break from studying?
Exactly. You have to consider those competing factors. He might suggest, while the data strongly support a physiological mechanism, we have to consider that the social component could be a mediating variable. Future studies should try to isolate that effect by comparing individual activity with group activity.
That forces such a balanced, nuanced interpretation.
It does. The discussion section as a whole elevates the paper from just a successful report into a really robust piece of critical analysis.
Okay, and that brings us to the final part, the conclusion. This is your chance to stick the landing.
It has to be powerful, but the key is that it cannot introduce new elements. It's all about wrapping up the intellectual journey you just took the reader on. And our sources give us 3 clear mandates for a good conclusion.
Mandate number 1.
Restate the thesis, but use different phrasing. Please do not copy and paste. The purpose here is to synthesize your original claim with all the evidence you just presented. It should sound like an earned victory.
So Hassan's original thesis was a prediction. His concluding statement is a confirmed finding.
Right, so instead of regular exercise reduces stress, he might write, the research overwhelmingly validates that routine physical activity functions as a necessary mechanism for mitigating academic stress. It sounds more confident.
More conclusive because it's been proven. What's mandate number 2?
Highlight the key findings established in the body. This is just a brief summary, 1 or 2 sentences, of the main pillars of your proof. It just reminds the reader of the journey.
Like, specifically, the data revealed a correlation between exercise and endorphins, a link between activity and lower anxiety, and an improvement in sleep.
A clean, quick review of his 3 main points. And that flows perfectly into mandate number 3. Offer suggestions for future research.
Which you already set up in the discussion section when you talked about limitations.
Exactly. Since you just identified a limitation, like the reliance on self-reported data, the conclusion is where you state what the next logical step in the academic conversation should be. Hassan would suggest, future research must move beyond perceived stress and use physiological biomarkers, like cortisol measurement, to definitively quantify the effect.
It keeps the momentum of the paper going, even after it's ended. And what's the one golden rule that can never be broken in a conclusion?
You absolutely must not introduce new sources, new arguments, or new evidence. If you suddenly cite a new study in your conclusion, the reader feels cheated. They'll think your argument was incomplete, and the whole structure just collapses right at the finish line.
The conclusion is for wrapping up, not for starting something new.
Exactly.
Okay, we have meticulously gone through the architecture of the paper. Let's circle back to that initial panic to Hassan staring at that blank page. This detailed outline we've built is the shortcut we promised.
It is. It transforms that abstract structure we just talked about into a concrete, executable plan. The detailed outline is, I'd say, 80% of the organizational work. Done. Once Hassan finishes this phase, he's solved all his structural problems.
And all that's left is the relatively simple task of expanding those bullet points into prose.
Exactly.
So let's build that outline for him, conversationally, using all the elements we just discussed.
Yeah.
We'd start with Roman numeral 1, IA introduction.
And here we just plug in that required 4-part sequence.
So IA would be the hook. A surprising statistic about student stress. IB is the background,
Right.
the general importance of stress management.
Mm-hmm.
IC is the research question, the specific query about exercise and stress.
Mm-hmm.
And then ID is the thesis statement, Hassan's strong statement naming the 3 mechanisms.
Perfect. That first paragraph is locked in. Now, big C, literature review. This is where the outline is so strategic because it dictates the themes you're going to use later.
Right. If his thesis names mood, anxiety, and energy, then his lit review has to cover the existing research on those 3 exact themes.
He has to. And he doesn't need to cite every source individually in their outline. This is a map, not the full territory. He just needs to list the themes and note which sources support each one.
So something like IA theme, mood and emotional regulation, and then in parentheses, a note to synthesize sources A, D, and F.
Exactly. Then IIB theme, Anxiety, and you note sources B, E, and G, and IC is theme, energy, with sources C, H, and I.
And what about the last part of the lit review?
He needs an ID for the identified gap. He makes a note about where the literature is thin, like the lack of long-term studies using those physiological biomarkers.
I really like that focus on the gap. It makes sure the lit review serves as a direct runway for the rest of the paper. It proves why the analysis is needed.
Right. And moving to the core, II3 analysis. This part has to directly address those three pillars from the thesis.
So, 3A Claim 1, evidence and analysis for mood improvement. And under that, he'd have subpoints for topic sentence, evidence, interpretation, connection.
And he'd do that same template for 3B anxiety reduction and 3C increased energy. That template forces him to remember to include that detailed interpretation for every single point. No more hanging quotes.
Okay, then IVE, discussion, the critical thinking step.
Here he'd have IV-A interpretation of evidence. What's the broader meaning? IV-D meaning of the results. What are the policy implications?
Then IVC limitations, self-reported data sample size, and IVD alternative explanations, considering social interaction as a factor.
This section forces him to really grapple with the complexity of his findings before he wraps it all up. And finally, V, conclusion.
VA summary, restate the thesis with that new authority. VB importance, briefly summarize the key findings. And VC future research, recommend the next logical step, like using cortisol levels.
Yes.
And our sources say that when Hassan actually followed this detailed outline, the writing process became, well, dramatically simpler.
Of course. He wasn't staring at a blank page anymore. He was just executing a plan. The plan already had the arguments, the evidence, the connections, even the moments for critical reflection. The stress of making constant decisions was just gone.
It transformed the daunting task of writing a persuasive paper into the manageable task of just adding full sentences to a proven skeleton.
It did?
The ultimate benefit of this, and the reason you should do it, is just clarity. When you know where the argument is going, the reader trusts you. And that clarity is the absolute foundation of being persuasive. You don't have to convince them of your structure, you just have to convince them of your argument.
Confusion is the enemy of persuasion. The outline eliminates confusion for everyone involved.
So this deep dive has mapped out the essential architecture of a compelling research paper, moving you from that initial chaos of notes to the clarity of a 5-part detailed framework. Introduction, lit review, analysis, discussion, and conclusion.
And I think the key takeaway here is structural. The detailed outline is not an optional step. It is a necessary, non-negotiable phase that has to happen before you start drafting. It ensures your focus stays on coherence and logic.
And we really hammered home that distinction between synthesis and summary, especially in the literature review, because that brings us to our final provocative thought for you to consider as you start structuring your own research.
Right. While the body paragraphs require that robust analysis of your evidence, the success of the entire paper often hinges on that literature review. The real intellectual heavy lifting is mastering the art of synthesis.
Not just reporting what source A and source B said.
Not at all. It's about creating a compelling thematic narrative that connects findings, highlights contradictions, and shows the tension in the academic dialogue. That is how you prove that your research is an essential step forward.
That synthesis is the intelligence of your paper shining through, justifying why you even wrote it in the first place. Something to think about as you review your own thematic groups.
Until next time.
We'll see you on the next deep dive.